Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A warning to our audience, the next two stories contain descriptions and images of police violence. The FBI has opened a civil rights investigation into the police killing of Andrew Brown Jr. in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. An independent autopsy confirms Brown, a 42-year-old black father, was shot 5 times by police, including in the back of the head. Brown's family and their lawyers have only been allowed to see a 20-second video of the killing from a single body camera, which shows Brown had his hands on the steering wheel of his car when he was shot dead. New surveillance video shows a group of officers in a car in the moments before Brown was killed. A lawyer says just 4 seconds passed from the time they arrived on the scene and the time they fired shots. On Tuesday, 5 people were arrested as protesters defied an 8 p.m. curfew in Elizabeth City to demand justice for Andrew Brown. In California, recently released body camera footage shows Alameda police killing Mario Arenales Gonzalez, a 26-year-old Latinx man, with officers kneeling on his back and shoulder until he loses consciousness, contradicting a previous account of the incident from police. Officers had alleged Gonzalez, who is from Oakland, died the morning of April 19th after suffering a medical emergency during a scuffle while they attempted to restrain him. But the footage has revealed Gonzalez was alone in a park when officers arrived at the scene after receiving complaints of a man who is allegedly intoxicated. Gonzalez calmly speaks to the officers before they attempt to place his hands behind his back. He screams as police are trying to handcuff him. The officers then pin him face down on the ground. One officer has his knee on Gonzalez's back, and another is kneeling on his shoulder for a few minutes until he becomes unresponsive. Police also allege Gonzalez had died at the hospital, but the footage shows he stopped breathing on site, with one officer saying he had no pulse. Gonzalez's family held a news conference Tuesday and demanded an investigation into his death.
Alameda police officers murdered my brother Mario. My mother was heartbroken to see Mario's last moments. Mario was a kind and humorous man. He was a loving father and the caretaker for our brother with special needs. The police killed my brother in the same manner that they killed George Floyd.
In international news, India's official coronavirus death toll has topped 200,000 as its devastating second wave continues to grip the nation. 360,000 new cases were reported over the past day, yet another record. Researchers say the true number of cases and deaths is likely far higher. As international assistance starts to trickle in, medical supplies remain dangerously low and hospitals and cremation sites are overwhelmed. This is an ambulance driver in New Delhi.
New makeshift cremation platforms are being constructed because there's no space for cremation inside the crematorium. A few platforms are being constructed here and a few are being constructed on the other side.
One group estimates at least 100 journalists in India have died of COVID, close to half of those within the past 2 weeks. Press freedom groups warn journalists are also facing increasing obstruction and censorship by the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Elsewhere, Turkey announced a full nationwide lockdown to slow its COVID surge. Turkey reported over 37,000 new infections over the past day, the 4th highest daily caseload in the world. Brazil has rejected Russia's Sputnik V vaccine over concerns about its safety, citing a lack of quality control and efficacy data. The maker of Sputnik V said the decision was politically motivated, pointing to a report earlier this year that said U.S. government officials pushed Brazil to turn down the vaccine. The World Health Organization has not yet approved Sputnik V for emergency use listing. Here in the U.S., the CDC issued new guidelines Tuesday saying fully vaccinated people do not need to wear masks outdoors except for at large gatherings such as concerts or sports stadiums. This is President Biden.
Beginning today, gathering with a group of friends in a park going for a picnic. As long as you are vaccinated and outdoors, you can do it without a mask.
The Seattle City Council in Washington passed a resolution urging Biden to support a waiver on patent rights for COVID-19 vaccines. Councilmember Kshama Sawant said, quote, "This resolution demonstrates our movement's rejection of the status quo of profit-driven vaccine apartheid and vaccine nationalism and our fight for vaccine internationalism, for a people's vaccine," she said. Meanwhile, a new Washington Post ABC News poll finds a quarter of women are worse off financially than they were before the pandemic versus 18% of men. And 27% of people of color say they're in a worse financial situation versus 18% of whites. The Biden administration is proposing a $1.8 trillion plan to invest in education, health care, child care, and paid family leave. Biden will unveil the American Families Plan during his first address to Congress this evening. The package will be funded in part through changes to the capital gains tax and a crackdown on tax evasion by the wealthy. Biden's proposing an $80 billion funding increase for the IRS over 10 years to fund the effort. White House officials say the move could generate $700 billion over 10 years. If passed, individuals who earn more than $400,000 a year would face a higher likelihood of an audit of their taxes. In Chad, at least 5 protesters were killed Tuesday as calls grow for a transition to civilian rule. Chad's been in a state of turmoil since the battlefield death of longtime President Idriss Déby last week. On Monday, Chad's new military leaders who took power following Déby's death banned demonstrations and named the runner-up of recent presidential elections as the transitional prime minister. The military government's rejected talks with the rebel fighters accused of killing Déby, who have been threatening to advance on the capital. In Ethiopia, a senior government official says up to 200 people were killed this month in clashes between Oromo and Amhara communities, Ethiopia's 2 largest ethnic groups. The fighting in the northern Amhara region has reportedly displaced over 250,000 people, including one small town that was completely burned in March. It's one of several flashpoints in Ethiopia. In the Tigray region, thousands of people have been killed since conflict broke out last November, with widespread reports of war crimes, including sexual violence against women and girls. The fighting's led to food shortages, and aid groups warn millions are at risk of famine. In Burkina Faso, 2 Spanish journalists were killed Monday in an ambush while on an anti-poaching patrol in the eastern region of the country. Journalists David Berayin and Roberto Fraile were working on a documentary about poaching and were traveling with about 40 people when an armed group attacked them on a road leading to the massive forested reserves of Palma. An Irish conservationist, Rory Young, was also killed, and at least 4 others were reported missing. The Committee to Protect Journalists condemned the attack and is demanding a thorough and transparent investigation. In El Salvador, pre-trial hearings on the 1981 El Mozote massacre are being held this week. Nearly 1,000 civilians from across 7 villages were killed in the massacre carried out by U.S.-trained Salvadoran military officers. One of the expert witnesses, Stanford University political scientist Terry Carl, detailed the on-site presence of U.S. military advisor Alan Bruce Hazelwood with the Salvadoran army at the time of the massacre, providing new insight into what Carl referred to as a sophisticated cover-up of the events on behalf of the Reagan administration and the Salvadoran military junta.
The presence of an American advisor with Salvadoran General Monterosa, whose name is Alan Bruce Hazelwood. If this had been made public at the time, in my opinion and the opinion of Thomas Enders and other secretaries of state, this would have cut U.S. aid because this is illegal.
Back in the U.S., Democrats and voting rights advocates are raising concerns that recently revealed census data will lead to an underrepresentation of Latinx residents as a result of former President Trump's attempts to exclude undocumented people from the 2020 census. Texas, Florida, and Arizona, which all have growing Latinx populations, had been projected to gain one additional House seat each, while Democratic states with large Latinx populations, such as California and New York, lost seats. California Congressmember Norma Torres tweeted, quote, "The Trump administration did everything it could to prevent an accurate count in the 2020 census. Now Californians are paying the price. The culture of fear he instilled within our communities jeopardizes billions in funding that our state deserves," she said. Meanwhile, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has asked Attorney General Letitia James to look into legal options after New York came just 89 residents shy of maintaining all of its congressional districts. It lost a seat. The Department of Homeland Security is limiting the power of Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents to arrest immigrants in or near courthouses unless they present an imminent danger or a national security threat. Meanwhile, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas launched a probe to address the threat of domestic violent extremism within his department. In other immigration news, the group La Resistencia is reporting an ICE flight earlier this week transferred 64 asylum seekers from the U.S.-Mexico border to Washington State's Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma, a for-profit immigrant prison run by GEO Group. In medical news, Oxford University researchers say their new anti-malaria vaccine proved highly effective at preventing disease among children in a small clinical trial in West Africa. The vaccine showed up to 77% efficacy in a study involving 450 toddlers in Burkina Faso, where malaria is endemic. Oxford researcher Adrian Hill said it's the first time a malaria vaccine has reached a goal set by the World Health Organization.
They want a malaria vaccine with 75% or more efficacy by 2030. We think we can do that. So 77% is the highest yet and could really add to the existing tools that we use to control malaria.
Malaria, which is caused by a mosquito-borne parasite, kills 400,000 people around the world each year, most of them small children. Back in the United States, Idaho's Republican Governor Brad Little signed into law a bill banning most abortions as soon as a fetal heartbeat can be detected, which can happen as early as 6 weeks before many people know they're pregnant. However, the bill will only go into effect if a federal appeals court upholds another so-called heartbeat ban, prompting reproductive rights groups to accuse the governor of signing the law simply to appeal to his, quote, radical followers. And in Massachusetts, nurses at St Vincent Hospital in Worcester have been on strike for 8 weeks to protest understaffing, nurse-to-patient ratios, and cuts to support staff, which have jeopardized patient care and staff safety and caused over 100 nurses to leave the hospital. St Vincent Hospital is owned by Tenet Healthcare, the third largest for-profit hospital company in the United States. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.